Common wisdom says that innovation comes from the private sector and entrepreneurs, while the government stands on the sidelines. This has been a consensus among mainstream economists and many governments since the late 1970s. At worst, the state is viewed as blocking innovation through tax, red tape, or regulation. At best, it is viewed as an enabler, creating an easy business environment for the private sector to flourish. But this view is increasingly being challenged by a new wave of economists who argue that government has been a major catalyst to technological innovation. Joon Chang, a South Korean economist at the University of Cambridge, has spent the last decade taking on mainstream economic thinking. He points out that Western nations successfully made use of a range of subsidies, investments and trade protections to boost innovation and build industries.
The state has actually played far more active role in promoting innovation and bringing about structural change in the economy than people often realize. The best example is the US government. After the Second World War, it has created so many industries through massive research and development funding from federal budget. So when you look at the US industries, in almost all areas that it has a technological advantage over its competitors. The industry was, at least in the beginning, created by basically government funding. So the computer industry and the internet were developed through funding from Pentagon. The semiconductor industry was created by the US Navy. The aircraft industry was massively subsidized by US Air Forces. The bioengineering industry would not have existed unless the American government's National Institutes of Health provided so much research funding in the pharmaceuticals and other health-related areas. So actually the US is a living proof that the government plays a very active role in promoting industry and promoting innovation. Of course, we don't hear about the starting period of these industries, so we think it's all individualized entrepreneurs working in Silicon Valley and so on, but the reality is that Silicon Valley would not have existed without the US defense research funding.
Last year, Mariana Mazzucato at the University of Sussex published The Entrepreneurial State, showing how many major technological innovations have come about through direct support from government.
What's striking is that places like the US, which most people do admit is one of the most innovative economies, most of the investments were direct, not indirect, not through tax incentives. And by direct, I mean things like the National Science Foundation funding Google's algorithm. I mean DARPA funding the internet, but even SMEs, which are constantly describing themselves as sort of the out-of-the-box thinkers, when actually if you look at the development of biotech, nanotech, internet, or today's clean tech sector, what you really see is a revolutionary state structure, decentralized, so I'm not talking about big brother ministry, top-down, a decentralized network of different public agencies which have played an absolutely revolutionary role, investing when the private sector was still too scared, even sometimes coming up with the idea of the new landscape, so the history of nanotechnology. In some ways, the vision, the mission around it actually came through, if you want, the public sector. And so, this is the myth, that there's one part that's revolutionary, another part that's inert, and it's just wrong. It's historically wrong, and it also then creates the wrong policies.
But innovation policy can fail. Critics point to its risks, including corruption, cronyism, and the creation of zombie companies, which, hooked on state subsidies, can't survive on their own.
Last 30 years of debate on industrial policy have produced actually a lot of insights into how these dangers can be minimized. So one example is that it is better to actually have publish a clear plan about your industrial policy in the beginning, so that it becomes difficult later for companies to manipulate the political decision makers and say, we are not doing well because of some unexpected result and so on, when you can show that 15 years ago when we started this scheme, you said in 15 years time you wouldn't need any subsidies. Now that you want it for another 10 years, this is not one.
A second challenge for government concerns the stability of the broader economic environment in which innovation policy happens, as Spain discovered the hard way.
The whole problem about financial, if you want, deregulation and sort of real estate crises, how they can really screw things up, even if you are making investments and making smart investments, if at the same time you have all this speculation going on, which makes another part of your economy completely unsustainable through, for example, a real estate bubble, well, then the whole thing can come crashing down. Spain, unlike Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Greece, the famous pigs of Goldman Sachs, was making all sorts of very smart investments in the years before the crisis. For example, around renewables. They were up there with Denmark as being, very courageous, visionary in that area, and then they had this massive real estate crisis. So this just really teaches us that all these different policies have to be lined up. You can't do innovation policy and then completely forget to do your financial market reform. To put also innovation at the center of growth theory and growth models, I think you have to really again, have much more coherence between how we understand financial markets, corporate governance, macro policy, and micro policy.